Hi, everyone. I'm back for another episode of Let's Talk About It with Hayley Manners, a track and field athlete who just graduated from UCF. Hayley, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hayley, you are the second Canadian to come on the podcast. The first was one of my best friends, McKenna. She was actually the first episode ever, and we talked about her medically retiring. And
Wow.
since then, I've had a couple of different people come on the show who are international student athletes as well. And they talked just about their experience coming and playing in the US and lots of different things. And it got pretty funny. But I really wanted to talk, to someone about NIL. For those of you who don't know, international student athletes have really wonky rules about NIL and what they can do and can't do in the US as student athletes on an F1 visa. So Hayley, I feel like you are an expert on that because not only were you an awesome athlete, you also really did take advantage of NIL and creating a personal brand in college. And that is a topic that's really ramping up lately right now with the House was being approved. So I know a lot of people are wondering about that. So I feel like it'd be great to have you on the show and talk about it. So let's just get started with what was your recruiting process like to Central Michigan where you started, and did being Canadian kind of impact that in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it's a completely different world coming from a different country, even though in my experience, it's literally just Canada. Like, we're not super far. I drove to Central Michigan. Like, it was nothing too crazy, not flying across an ocean. But yeah, my recruitment process was probably a lot different than a lot of people. I also started track and field and taking it seriously about halfway through high school. I was a competitive gymnast for 6 years, and once I grew too tall for that, I was like, "Okay, well, I gotta do something else." So, took up track and field and really got my start. I think it was 11th grade when I got a silver medal at our state meet. It's provincials for us, but that was really where I got attention of a couple of coaches, and it really started with the Canadian schools, and then eventually I had a connection to somebody that was actually Canadian that went to Central Michigan, and she was like, "Hey, like, check out this long jumper. She is just getting her start, pretty much raw talent." And that's really how I ended up at CMU, was through this kind of mutual connect. So definitely didn't have a ton of offers or like interest. People really didn't know who I was. And so I was kind of just lucky to fall into that situation where I was able to go to CMU.
Wow, that's so interesting. So coming from Cornell, there's so many Canadian student athletes.
Or
So right, you probably have seen a lot of track athletes, but then also a lot of hockey players, which, hockey, yeah. So you can imagine, and we're so close to Toronto. So that's a huge part of it. It's so cool though that you said hey, I started late. I also started volleyball later than most, and it has really defined my career. But I love that you were able to find a community and people to help you with that and kind of achieve this new dream of yours, and also just pivoting when you realized, okay, gymnastics isn't working. It's time for something else. It's really cool that you did that. Were you always posting and kind of doing building a personal brand throughout even high school and into college? Or when did that whole thing get started?
It's so interesting that you ask that, because reflecting back on really where my content creator journey started, I tell everybody that, it was when I got hurt in my first semester at UCF in grad school. This is not that long ago. This is about a year and a half ago. I really started taking it seriously then and acting like a creator. But there were times back in, I think it was high school when I started posting on my Instagram story every single Monday. I had this little series called Motivation Monday, and I would just find a little quote on Pinterest and put it in this cute little Canva template. And I would post that on my story every single Monday. And all of my friends, all of my 200 followers that followed me at the time would, see that. And I feel like that's really where it started. I've always had a passion for getting behind the camera and going out and doing fun things and documenting it. I'm always the friend that is videotaping everything that's going on when we're hanging out. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, making video stars when you were a kid and using iMovie and all that. So I feel like that's really where it started. And it honestly took a season-ending injury for me to kind of lock in and be like, look, how are you going to use your time now? How are you going to capitalize on maybe a not so great circumstance and turn it into something great. So I would definitely say it started there.
Wow. I feel like for a lot of people, this kind of thing comes from like some like, I don't know, like come to Jesus moment or whatever, where you're like, wait, like I've always enjoyed this. Like, yeah, you're right. Maybe I should start making content. Or maybe it's just like you just are posting it and something blows up and you're like, wow, I could continue doing this. Like, I love that you were able to find that even though it was later on in life, again, like people might say.
Yeah.
So, with this in mind, like you loved creating content, whether you knew that it was considered making content or not, going into college. I think we're kind of in the same kind of year boat, everything. Like NIL wasn't really a thing when we were going into college and
Yep.
starting. But I feel like what you're saying about just being loving creating content, people being interested in what you're making and what you're saying, that was kind of the basis for the push around NIL anyway, was like these student athletes who had these like huge YouTube channels, which I know like you've been building your YouTube channel, which is awesome,
Thank
who
you.
couldn't monetize it. Right. And because they were an NCAA athlete who were like
Yep.
doing really cool things and couldn't monetize their brand. I feel like you're kind of still in that boat a little bit, like as an international student athlete. Can you talk a little bit about specifically what those rules are for you?
Yeah. So to not get too deep into the details, because I literally feel like I could talk about this all day.
Wait, no,
But
please do a bit in the details because all like I feel like I mean there's gonna be so many people like that want to watch this. I really
yeah,
think a lot of the people who are watching this right now are international student athletes who are like, I don't know what the rules are, like I can't read that paper. So please like translate the rules into words that like people can understand.
I got you. Okay, let me try to start from the very beginning because,
Okay.
like you said, NIL rules were not a thing when I was a freshman in college. And so it has kind of completely transformed how collegiate athletics looks for international athletes. But the one thing that hasn't changed is, like you touched on earlier, the F1 visa status, which is typically the most common visa that student athletes who are coming to the US from a foreign country will be on while they're here in the US. And so with that, there's a couple of rules that are very limiting in terms of NIL. And one of those big rules is the work study rule. And so essentially, any work that you do here in the US, first of all, has to be documented and properly stated to your institution's global or international advisory committee. But it also limits you to only working on campus. That's a big thing that I feel like people kind of misread or forget to look at. You can only do work study jobs. So anything that's, if there's a cafe that's on campus or you want to work at the front desk of your residence hall, those are all okay. You're actually limited to only 12 or 20 hours a week during the fall and spring semesters. I believe in the summer when you're not full-time enrolled, you can go up to 40 hours, but it's like super limiting in terms of what you can actually do to work and make money. Because at the end of the day, the F1 visa is a student visa. Like you're coming into the US to study, and that's the primary purpose, and that's how immigration sees it. And so when the NIL rule changed, there was not really any consideration for international athletes because it was kind of just like, well, everyone who's here in the US, like NIL is legal now, you guys can make money. And nobody was really there to jump out and say, hey, like international students, you guys actually have to, not do that. And you can only be limited to doing that in your home country, which is what I've been advised to do. And I would say, to give any advice out there is to just always play it safe, especially if you're somebody who is considering staying in the US beyond your time as a student athlete, which is something that I can also get into because I'm dealing with that right now. And there's so many things that people just do not talk about when it comes to actually being done at your school and you want to stay in the US. It's crazy. But yeah, at the end of the day, the F1 visa, very limited work opportunities, which doesn't allow NIL to fit into that. And so that's where things have kind of gotten sticky and where in certain places rules have gotten bent and different, ideas have been bounced around through, all sorts of institutions to get this fixed. But unfortunately, we haven't made any headway on that because it all still remains the same since the NIL rules changed.
So we had a lot of international student athletes on my team at Syracuse, and that was something like I always brought up to them. And I would say that my team at Syracuse was like kind of half-half on NIL and just content creation in general, but I definitely think that there's like a little bug going around and people want to start posting more. And it's so interesting to me that you say that because like every school is so different in like the cost of attendance, but also just what it takes to be able to afford going to school. Like, especially if you're living in a big city versus like a smaller school, like how big is the stipend that you're given, like as a student athlete? Like, so just not being able to have a flexible way of making money is so that's just such a difficult experience. Like I can only imagine. And also because that is what makes NIL so cool for a lot of athletes. It's like, oh, I can get my coffee every morning paid for by posting a story or getting a deal with like a local coffee shop.
Right.
And that can offset what $50 a week that I usually spend because now my coffee is free. Like and I
Yeah.
don't have time to make that $50 a week at the bookstore because I'm in practice all the time and I have to study and all that.
Exactly.
So, like, I can see how frustrating that might be. And, like, so many student athletes, even those on scholarship, like, still get jobs outside of school and outside of volleyball or their sport. So,
Yeah.
that's so frustrating. So you still though like make a lot of content and still have like I would say like a very successful like content creation like business or emerging business in that.
Thank you.
So how were you able to participate in the spirit of NIL without it necessarily being like American NIL?
Yeah, you know what? I really pride myself and tried to shift a lot of my focus to just doing everything that I could within the bounds of the F1 visa. And so, what that looked like was really just focusing in on my personal brand and figuring out how I could build a community of people who would support me and would see kind of like the vision behind where I wanted to take these things and really just kind of understand who I was as a person and the direction that I was heading so that in the event that something changed one day, I would have built a trusted audience who would then take my word for things. And, if I ended up promoting something in the future, they would be more inclined to go and buy it, or things would convert in that way because they would see me kind of as like the trusted expert. And so I really focused on just creating relatable, educational, sometimes entertainment type of content, but really just documenting my experience through mostly recovering from my injury and what it's like going from a mid-major to a Power 4 school, anything and everything between, being a student athlete, being an international athlete, and what it's like to be in grad school while also, you know, pursuing D1 athletics. So I really, really just tried to share the story. I guess storytelling is what I'm getting at, is the big thing that I could do. And then once I kind of built up a platform for myself, I was able to actually go home in the summer and figure out a couple of brand deals in the 3 months while I was there, make a bit of money, and then hopefully have that time me over when I went back to school in the fall. And then, 2 weeks at Christmas break, if I could make anything work during that time, I'd be hustling too. So really, I just tried my best to capitalize on everything that was legal while in the US and then trying to take advantage of that and make some money while I was at home.
So I always was under the impression like Lululemon is the Canadian brand. I was
Yes.
always under the impression that you could still be at UCF and then you just decide to work with Lululemon. Is that not true? You have to be in Canada at the time of doing everything?
That is from people like immigration lawyers and specialists that I've spoken to, the thing that they advise the most is that all the content you create, if it's a paid promotion or an ad or a brand deal, you have to explicitly show or at least disclose your location and make sure that it's in Canada. And they would even take it a step further and make sure you're getting paid in your home country's bank account or currency, even so that it's all happening outside of the US, so that if you ever wanted to pursue permanent residency or get a green card, there would be no sort of red flags being like, well, how did you make this money when you were a student, when you're on an F1, Even though Lululemon is a Canadian brand, if they came up to you, I know they're doing a lot of collabs at different universities right now in their bookstores with merch. Like if they had an opportunity like that at my school, I still wouldn't be able to participate because it's happening here in the US. So it makes things so complicated, but that's unfortunately how, we have to deal with it right now.
I had no idea. I really thought, I really thought I'd be like, no, this is Lululemon. Like, it's fine. Like, I would have never known that. And so this is why, like, I have other people come on the show.
I wish it was like that, honestly. I could be cashing in.
No, that is, I had no idea. And that again, another thing that makes it difficult. It's like, I'm from San Diego. Like, I live in San Diego and I still was not home that often during my, time as a college athlete. So imagine like having to, you lived closer to home, like you could drive, but like some of my teammates lived in the Czech Republic or lived in Germany and different things like that makes it really, really difficult. So
Absolutely.
I feel like I like want to do a little bit of like speculation right now because I feel like you have talked to a lot of people like that about this, that you've become an expert in a way. And so now with like revenue share and all of that, like, do you think that that could potentially be put under like the F1 visa and work study since it's through the school?
Look, I think for international students and for university institutions, there's going to be a lot of work to do now that this bill has passed. I think it's a really interesting time because, like you said, this is literal revenue that is going to come straight from the institution. It's not scholarship money. It's completely different. And I just feel like schools are not prepared to work that out with their international athletes yet. So it should be really interesting to see how things roll out. I think one thing that has been considered based on, my connections and people who I've talked to who are experts in the space is that there should be like an F1 subcategory for student athletes. And hopefully, that becomes a thing one day so that it would allow these athletes to capitalize like their teammates. But it then puts, other students who are non-athletes on an F1 visa. There's definitely going to be an argument there like, well, we want to work and not have to be limited to being on campus without an extra authorization. So it's going to raise a lot of questions and honestly could be a determining factor for how many international students we actually see at these schools now, because if you think about it, it's easier to just not have any, to not have to deal with that. And so that's a whole other conversation as well, that we might actually see less international student athletes getting the opportunity to be on these teams just because schools don't want to have to go through all that, right? So,
would you say then, do you think student athletes would still want to come and play in the US even with these rules, but the issue is more that schools might not want to deal with that? Is that what you're saying?
absolutely. I think there's always going to be a want for international athletes to come to the US. I mean, in my own experience, the competitiveness, the atmosphere is unmatched to anywhere else in the world. You will not get an experience like that where sports is cared about so much. And so there will always, in my opinion, be a want for international athletes coming to the US. But like I said, I think it'll be on the universities who have to deal with this new house settlement that, it's going to be up to them really at their discretion if they want to bring on these international athletes, because they're going to have to figure out a way to legally pay them or find some way to keep them here if they can't. So it should be interesting.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. So you brought up earlier when we were talking that you are now like looking to potentially stay in the United States. You want to pursue a professional career. You've already built an amazing following of, I'm assuming, like mainly American, audiences. And you obviously have built a community between the two schools that you've gone to, and you've created a life for yourself here. So what is that looking like now? And what are some things that people who are watching should consider as they do that?
Absolutely. I think this is just a topic that so many people miss when talking about international student athletes in general. I think most people are concerned about what happens during your 4, 5, or 6 years in college, and not a lot of consideration goes into what happens after you graduate and if you end up wanting to stay in the US, which is exactly where I'm at right now. And so what a lot of people don't understand is that once your F1 visa expires, if you don't take any further action on it, then you actually are expected to leave the US and go back to your home country. And so the option that you have actually is called OPT, which is, I believe it stands for optional practical training, but it's a work authorization that you can apply for through immigration, through your international advising office at your school. They should be able to help you with that. But it essentially, if you're accepted, gives you 365 days of extra time in the US to get a job, get your feet on the ground. And then once that year is up, you either have to pursue permanent residence, you have to go through the H-1B process, which is essentially getting a green card, or you can try and apply for some other form of visa. That's probably the most common way that people stay here. But essentially, once you're off of that F1 visa, it's kind of up to you to figure out how you're going to stay here. And I just feel like a lot of people who kind of make their life here, like I said, and have all these great experiences. I know me personally, like a lot of my friends are here in the US between Florida and Michigan now. And so it's always been in the back of my mind, like, how am I going to stay here? And so that is, I would say, the best way. OPT is applying for that. It's about a $500 fee to
Wow.
process that application, which is crazy. Uh,
And
but
you can't easily earn that money either.
exactly, like I feel like one
That's like
branch.
a social media post and you can't even do it. Yeah.
Right. Oh, it's crazy. But no, you've got to pay that fee. And then for me, it took about 3 months for everything to get processed and finally get approved for it. But then you have literally a year to kind of get your feet on the ground, get a job that will hopefully want to sponsor you beyond that 1 year, because otherwise, once the year is up, you essentially have to pack up and go home anyways. So it's just this really confusing process that is not talked about enough. And I feel like, honestly, there should be more support from universities guiding athletes who maybe want to stay and keep their life here in the US after committing 4 great years and committing to those programs. So,
Yeah. And so for that process that you just talked about, you said it took 3 months. Was it 3 months post graduation, or did you have to apply before it was time to graduate?
you do have to apply before you graduate. So it's like you have to be thinking 10 steps ahead, and you always have to make sure you're not missing any deadlines and anything like that. Because at the end of the day, this is immigration. Like, this is beyond your school. This is up to you. And if something falls or slips through the cracks, like, it's going to be on you. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of universities who maybe don't have the resources to help aren't able to guide you through that process. And so it's really up to the athlete if they want to stay, to take initiative and really go through that process. But yeah, in my last semester, I completed the application in March, I guess, and my information just got processed in the last few days. So it definitely takes time. And even then, you have to wait for the official documentation before you can start work. And you have to communicate that with your future employer that, you can only stay for a year, because sometimes that's something that an employer isn't really a fan of, because, there's so many things that happens in that process. But
Yeah, there were a lot of, I mean, Syracuse just has a very large international student community. So this conversation, and just especially in this timing, is just very near and dear to my heart at the moment. And I had quite a few friends who were brilliant at their skills and what we were learning. And we're having, so easily getting interviews and getting offers and different things. But then the second it was like, oh, I'm going to need a visa support, it was like a problem because of the country that they were from, or because of the size of the business and what the business was able to handle. There is a financial strain on businesses for supporting that visa. There's a lot of rules around how many that they can have and all these different things. And especially like where we are right now, like that's just like a very hard line to tread.
absolutely.
Um, I want to add one more layer before we finish up today, which is just that you are not pursuing like the normal type of career where you can kind of just get that visa, like even if you could, like supporting and sponsoring you. So what is that like for you as a track athlete? Are you kind of using that year to build the business that you just kind of launched and to become a pro, or how are you tackling that year?
Yeah, so I think my strategy moving forward, first of all, I've taken some time to just relax. I feel like that is something that us as athletes, once you're done, like, we just need to breathe and be like a normal human being for a bit. So I've been loving that. But I think just heading into this next year, I really need to just find a solid foundation. I studied business administration and sports management for grad school. And so I'm lucky to have a couple, internships under my belt and to have these pretty degrees that I can sort of use as leverage to try and get a great job to get my feet on the ground. So that's definitely priority number one. Being on OPT, it definitely revolves around employment. So you actually do have to have a solid job. I believe it's part-time hours, so a minimum of 20 hours a week. And that's essentially the way that you're able to keep that status active. And so finding a job is number one. Number two is definitely still pursuing that dream of going pro in track. And I think that that'll look a little bit different for me just because, again, coming off of 2 foot surgeries and literally just making it back in time for my conference meet this year was a blessing in itself. And so just taking some time off to let my body heal and get back to it in the fall, really have some good training and trying to balance that between working full time and also training. And then to add another layer, I'm always going to stay updated on my content, posting on Instagram, YouTube, and building a business. So I really am just throwing it all out there, going to see what sticks. And that's how we're going to go about it.
That is so amazing. Hayley, thank you so much for driving some knowledge, just being such an inspirational person and just coming on the show. I can imagine this is such a hard topic to talk about right now, especially, and just speaking on everything. And so I just really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope somebody out there can take at least one thing from what we talked about today.
Oh, I know they will. Hey guys, it's Sydney. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk About It. If you did, make sure to leave a review and send it to your friend. Let's keep this conversation going. I'll see you guys next week.